Broadcasting live on the Ops Lens app, iHeartRadio, Mojo 50 Radio, and online worldwide at thepcradioshow.com.
So we're back for our day 2 on Mojo 50 Radio, iHeartRadio, and on the Ops Lens app. If you haven't had the opportunity to download the Ops Lens app, it's actually quite comprehensive and pretty cool. You can actually pontificate on your own and go to the uncensored chat areas where you're able to communicate with me. You're able to communicate with Matt Locke, Rocky Stucci in the Situation Room. It's very cool. Thanks for having me back. Fortunately, not kicked off of the airwaves after my first performance yesterday. No fines yet from the FCC, so we seem to be doing okay. I was thinking about the way that I had started my show yesterday, and I was listening back to it, just making sure that I didn't slip and say anything that I shouldn't have. But we are never going to bow to the politically correct. PC culture here means patriotically correct. It's the Patriotically Correct radio show. My host not here today. We'll get to that and the reason why momentarily. But I started yesterday's show with a rant about how I knew Democrats and that I know them and that I love them. And that's true. I do know Democrats personally, and I do love them. They're a part of my family. They're in my group of friends. The Democrats that I know have been in the party for a long time. They were raised that way. Their grandparents were Democrats. Their parents were Democrats, and so on and so on. A lot of the Democrats that I know are incredibly stubborn. And when I, get into conversations and banter with them, they'll tell me that they vote the party line. Blue, man, blue. Could never imagine voting for anybody other than a Democrat. They come over for dinner. They're at my family gatherings. They're good-hearted people who've always supported their party blindly, and we banter political rhetoric around like a ping pong ball every time we're in each other's company, and it's fun. It really is. There's no arguing. There's no shouting down. There's no yelling. There's no name calling. For those of you who want just a short history, and obviously we don't have time in a 1-hour show to get too in depth on the history of the Democratic Party, but it was founded in the 1800s and was largely conceived by Andrew Jackson supporters. It's the world's oldest active political party. But the Democrats of today would have Jackson and his people rolling over in their graves. You may not believe it, but the original Democrats actually supported limited government and supported limited government well into the 20th century. To further illustrate that, the party actually had conservative-leaning pro-business and Southern conservative populist wings. But the Democrats started to evolve. And as they did, the party moved into a platform that was more progressive and became the socially liberal party. Geographically speaking, Democratic voters are typically found in the northeast part of the country, New York, Delaware, Philly, the whole area there. And Republicans have traditionally been able to count on most of the South to cast a vote for them to support the elephant. The working class has always been the most supporting base for Democrats and the most important base for the Democrats. And the unions have obviously always backed the party. Democrats are not the enemy of today's America, and democratically leaning people don't represent a threat to America's political, social, or societal systems. The real threat to America, the real threat to the safety of your family, the threat to the success of your small business, which small businesses are the backbone of the U.S. economy, the threat to public safety, the threat to national security, and the threat to your freedom are not Democrats in name. The real threat to your freedom are the hijackers. The extremist liberal progressives like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. AOC is undisputedly the most popular politician on the left side of the aisle, and her social media numbers will confirm that. Why do you think that is? Where does this support come from? Occasio-Cortez has been very outspoken on her radical plan for America. She doesn't try to hide it, not at all. In a recent interview with Anderson Cooper, as he was slobbering over her and his microphone, asking her the real challenging and tough questions, really holding her accountable, asking her the real questions. He's a true journalist. He was massaging her for her scripted talking points about her proposed legislation titled the Green New Deal. And in short, he asked her about the accusations that she's a radical. Conservatives or Republicans, they may call you a radical. Those bigoted racists who can't stand you because you're non-white, and they're there on their privileged platform calling you a radical. To that you say what? And she said, well, okay, radicals do radical things. And in her interview with Anderson Cooper, the Rothschild, look him up, look up his history. Speaking of Entitled, in the interview with Cooper, she said, radicals do radical things. Think about Abraham Lincoln. It was a very radical thing to do to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. So if that's radical, then call me radical, she says. Okay, you're a radical, but not a radical like you're saying. Trying to massage Americans with sensationalism while you somehow try to correlate your vision for destruction with the signing of a document that freed black slaves is insulting to Americans. It's insulting to me. It's insulting to the listeners of this show. It's insulting to patriots. Radical, the way that you're seeing it as a good thing, is completely opposite of the radical that you're trying to illustrate. Radical would be choosing to rebel against a truly tyrannical crown. Radical is standing for the true injustices of the world and freeing the bonds of slavery from the human race. Radical is the hunt of evil and the willingness to die in the sand, quite literally, to seek out and destroy or kill terrorists like Osama bin Laden. Radical is putting on a gun and a badge and running directly into gunfire to protect the lives of the people who curse you, the people who spit at you, the people who hate you. I was talking to Richard Leonard, the co-host of this low-budget afternoon talk show. We were talking on the phone last night. He's training with the U.S. Army this week and unable to fulfill his co-hostal duties here on PC Radio, but we'll let it slide. As you know, patriotic duty to our country will always trump the regurgitation of political rhetoric on an under-budgeted half-ass podcast like this one. But the question came up, when did Democrats go so hard left? What caused the Democratic Party to adopt this socialist, Marxist, communist ideology? The answer is Democrats didn't. Now think about that. Let's break that down. When I said the Democratic Party was hijacked, I was illustrating the systematic and hostile takeover of a party that was forcefully removed from their seats. Traditional Democrats have been forcefully removed and replaced with the comrades like AOC and Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Barack Obama's people, Van Jones, a self-proclaimed communist, the socialists, the extremists, the Marxists. The Democrats that used to carry the torch of freedom with you and I have now been replaced with the tyrannical, guilt-shaming, fear-mongering champions of hate and division, destruction and chaos, looting and burning, rioting and killing, devastation and terror. The unlawful use of violence, intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims, terrorism. You, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are quite literally a terrorist by definition. It's no surprise that your BFF, your co-squad member, your comrade in arms, Ilhan Omar, is actually on record as a sympathizer who all but endorsed the actions carried out by Islamic terrorists on American soil nearly 19 years ago. Some people did something. She said she was addressing the CARE people, fellow Muslims, fellow Somalians. She was talking about the extremist jihadists that killed nearly 3,000 people, and the death toll continues to rise every day. Some people did something. Think about that. Think about what she said. She also said the CARE Act was founded because some people did something, and now we're losing our civil liberties. Now let's apply that to her words regarding the city of Minneapolis, the city that's on fire, the city that you were elected to represent. Your congressional district is burning. Your district is being destroyed and looted. Businesses that have become staples of the local community in your district have been literally destroyed in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, who you prop up as a hero, a career criminal who you choose to make a martyr in your quest for social justice and criminal justice reform. Your golden child, whose name and whose tragic death you're using against the wishes of his family. By the way, George Floyd's family said he would have wished for none of this in his name. But shamelessly, you ignore their sentiment. The family of George Floyd, who is, whether he was a career criminal or not, was their brother, their cousin, their son, their family. They would wish none of this in his name and swear that he would not either, but you will still use his name to legitimize your radical agenda and defund, disband, and dissolve law and order in Minneapolis, your efforts to rid of the Minneapolis Police Department. So let me ask you, weren't those cops just some people that did something? And isn't every cop in America being indicted and convicted in the court of popular public opinion as a result of your false narrative, your systemic racism? You stand in front of the drooling media-held cameras and frame this incident as a racially motivated murder. You shame anyone that supports their police, and you do it from your pedestal of protection provided by armed cops that keep you safe in our once beautiful city that you have a direct hand into turning into a violence-filled shithole. You and your elitist co-conspirators pat each other on the back, feeding your narcissistic, out-of-touch, sociopathic egos while joining giblets from your moral pedestals as you look down on the poor peasant like me who shall have no opinion. You, little taxpayer, you over there, little taxpayer, you shut up. You see, what I'm saying is the opinion may be socially popular in some groups of gamers living in mommy's basement, feeding off the tit of the government and regurgitating the writings of Chairman Mao from their little red books. But the opinion, although popular in those groups, is not the opinion of the majority. It is not the opinion of America. It is not the opinion of us. Americans prop up real heroes like George Washington, while you memorialize dead criminal thugs. Washington was granted power, given power, and rejected it. You and your fellow fist raisers crave power, and you'll stop at nothing to gain it. You spread division, and you spread racism. You spread the seeds of hate like a lot lizard spreads venereal disease at a truck stop along I-70. The Democrats that I know and love are not with you. The Democrats that I know and love have a standard of core values, honesty, and faith. The Democrats that I know and love are walking away. They're running away. They're running away from your lies, your deceit, your betrayal. To you, the extremist Muslim terrorists responsible for the most prolific attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor are just some people who did something. But we who you are attempting to silence, we who love our country, we, the American patriots, will never forget. With us today is Brett Kokinadis. Coconautis has been a technology entrepreneur for over 20 years in communications, mobile software, and computer vision technologies. As the founder of the New Mexico Democrats for Democracy, Coconautis walked away from the Democratic Party and was a recent Republican candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. Brett, you were a Democrat. What made you walk away?
Oh, I just listened to your monologue, and you're right on the money. It's not just so much walking away, it's running away. And New Mexico is a prime example of why others should do that. You talked a lot about what's happening, about how the Democratic Party has been hijacked by the socialists, by the progressive left. You know, AOC has set up her own PAC to basically challenge, the moderate conservative Democrats. That's happening in our state, too. It's been happening in New Mexico. And when you watch these candidates come out, including our Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, who won her gubernatorial race in 2018, she was a moderate Democrat, and she was forced to become extremely progressive. The party attacked anyone who didn't agree with the progressive agenda. We have a very similar policy that was signed into law to the Green New Deal. We call it the Energy Transition Act, which is going to just decimate New Mexico as far as ratepayers, our energy stability, and our economy. It's happening every day more and more in this state. We spent $2 billion of surplus money. The state is now suffering because of COVID and just the decimation of our economy, including the oil and gas industry.
I say this, I'm sure that you've been involved with some ambush journalism in your history. You've been in front of the media. You were a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives. And so I ask this question not in that light, okay? But I think it's important that we are always candid. I think it's important that we are always relentless seekers of the truth. And furthermore, I don't want anybody to be able to use anything that you say against you. So just to clear the record, in our previous phone conversations, I asked you if you felt that you were pushed out of the Democrat Party. You told me no. In an article that I was reading this morning, the Santa Fe New Mexican quoted you saying that you felt, quote, pushed out of the Democrat Party for talking facts. Can you explain that and clear that up for us?
Sure. Well, keep in mind, when I was running Democrats for Democracy, I was not a candidate. I was not an active member in the party other than being a registered Democrat and voting Democrat. What I mean by being pushed out of the party was just by the populist voice on social media. You know, we presented facts and evidence about candidates' policies, their positions, their history as far as some of the shady dealings that they were allegedly involved in the state and at the federal level. And it didn't really matter about the facts or evidence or what any, topic you presented of the day. It was just, well, we hate the president, we're against the president, and we want these progressive policies to be supported at every level of government. There is no logic. Like I said, I'll go back to some of the more critical policies that we had in place, but you could raise all the facts and evidence you want. It didn't matter. And that's what I mean by being pushed out,
Sure.
Was that the popular voice just pushed you out. And it's not that there aren't those people, like you're saying, the moderate conservative Democrats. New Mexico is a very unique space because you'll talk to most Democrats here. Faith, family, freedom, they love their Second Amendment. We have a lot of hunters and ranchers and a big diverse culture in this state where firearms, hunting, outdoors, that's not only part of their culture, but that's also part of their survival.
Something interesting that you mentioned was that it was like the whole agenda was just anti-Trump. I hate the president, and so I have to do this. It's almost like these people have, they're all like ADHD. They're running around like gremlins, like forgetting what I just said yesterday. But as long as it's consistent with the fact that I hate the president, that is the message that we need to get out. Now, some of your previous political opponents used some tweets of yours from the past where you were very critical of President Trump. How do you feel about the president now?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that was something that I was very transparent about. I knew that was going to come out because of my vocal statements against the president initially. But you're right on the money about the groupthink. You're bombarded 24/7 with online media, with the news, talking about how horrible the president is and what have you. The thing is, when you start looking at the evidence and facts and turn off the primary media, you can start seeing all the benefits that the president has done for this country. I mean, we were talking pre-COVID, unemployment rates, putting America first, securing our borders, which, during the COVID initial crisis, we mutually agreed to close our borders with Mexico and Canada, which was a clear and perfect example why we need to have control over our borders. Putting travel restrictions to protect Americans, the booming economy. So not only did I do a 180 on the president, but during the campaign, I did have the honor of meeting with him. I became a maxed out donor. I met with his campaign staff out in Virginia at the time. And, when we look at the 2020 election, we're really faced with, do we embrace America as we have known it, or are we going to allow America to turn into a communist or socialist country? And it's very scary when you look at the Revolutionary Communist Party of America endorsing the Democratic president for election.
It's insane. Bernie Sanders was really, until Biden got into the race late, Sanders was the presumptive nominee early on in this deal. He's a socialist, and he says it. Are Americans really for this? Or are Americans being duped?
Well, here, I think they're being duped, and here's part of the problem. Okay, you have organizations like Justice Democrats, you have AOC, Ilmar, and all these other folks out there championing the voice that's been ignored by all the parties. And both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have ignored those voices. We have young people who don't necessarily actively vote, but I think they're starting to come of age, that have legitimate concerns about the future, their problems. And we don't necessarily have to agree with the socialist solution to those problems, but neither party has really come forward and presented a real solution to those issues. And that's, I think, big part of the reason why a lot of these progressive candidates have gotten in.
Do any politicians or elected officials ever gain their office and then actually focus on solutions? Is that something that gets done?
No, and you're exactly right. I went through a lot of training and just, mentorship from some currently elected officials, and basically they're telling me about strategies that they use, very similar to, like in a business world, how we would use a SWOT chart, but they use something called Red Fox 4. And this is just basically a way that they analyze legislation or propose legislation that basically, helps them, helps their party, hurts their opponent, or hurts their oppositional party. And that's really not how government should work, unfortunately, but that's just kind of the truth of the matter. When we look at how even the progressives are using their legislation, do you think any of them really fully understand the impact of the Green New Deal?
If they do and they're still supporting it, they are enemies of America. Right. We're talking about the total destruction of nearly everything that America has built. We're talking about taking away individual liberties and the freedom to drive a vehicle. We're talking about getting rid of energy. Are we going to live in the dark, Brett?
Well, I certainly don't want to, and New Mexico is well on its way with our own policies that want to go 100% renewable and depend on energy shortfalls by buying power from California. And we all know California already has a shortage and brownouts and all those other issues. So New Mexico is going to be in a world of hurt. The issue that we look at, though, going back to that point, is how do you emotionally sell your voter base? And that's what's happening. No one's really looking at the deal. They're all just saying, oh, we want to, protect the environment. I have not met a single voter, regardless of party, and I've talked to everybody, that doesn't want to be a good steward of the planet.
Hey, Brett, I'm coming up against a hard break here. I'm really enjoying our conversation. Would you mind sticking around and coming back after the break?
Absolutely.
All right. We're talking to Brett Coconautis. He was a Democrat, and he actually ran for New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. We'll talk about how it went from the 3rd to the 1st. Coming up after the break, stick around. Plus, coming up on the show, we have the Daily Dilemma. That's going to be a new segment, all right? You're going to want to hear about that. Get on over to the OpsLens app. Make sure that you download that. If you're on Mojo 50 and iHeartRadio, stick around. We'll be right back. And always broadcasting worldwide at thepcradioshow.com. My name is Stu. This is PC Radio. We'll be back right after this. Stick around. Don't go anywhere.
They're no Rocky Stucci, but they'll have to do. A low-budget answer for your deranged listening habits. Stu and Rich. Patriotically correct radio. Population of 350 million and 7.8 billion worldwide. We thank the 12 of you that listen to this garbage.
It's garbage, and I'll tell you why.
The Patriotically Correct Radio Show.
Eat me.
With Stu and Rich. Worldwide at thepcradioshow.com.
Worldwide at thepcradioshow.com. Get on over there. If you missed the show from yesterday, or if you ever miss a show, make sure that you get over there, check it out. We also have a place where you can sign up for news. If you like spelling and grammatical errors, I think Richard Leonard will be blogging over there on that site as well. We are having, behind the scenes, a plethora of technical difficulties. I'm telling you, during the break, I was telling our guest, Brett, Intern Boy has been scrupulously, fervently working to try to get this stuff fixed. But, of course, like he does with everything else, he is systematically failing in every way here in our studio. Brett, you and I were talking a little bit about during the break about some other things as well, and we've had previous phone conversations. Something that we haven't talked about, and I don't know if it's really a big deal anymore. You're an openly gay guy. I think it's becoming less of a talking point in America. But what about in politics? Do you think traditional supporters of GOP conservatives took issue with that, and do you think it affected you in the New Mexico primaries?
I really don't think it was that big of an impact. If anything, I mean, the Republicans have the Log Cabin Republican group, which is a LGBTQ community. I look at it as a strength because there are a lot of conservative gay and lesbian business owners. We all care about our success, our money, our liberties, our freedom. Right. And the same Constitution that protects everybody else protects us.
That's right. That was part of my monologue yesterday, or my rant at the beginning of the show. I mean, we live in the greatest country on the face of the planet. There is no dispute for that. That is a fact. We have equal rights here for everybody. And these narratives are just spinning out of control. They're like little rats running around from hole to hole, scavenging for any cheese they can find. I've said that I know good Democrats, and I do. It's my opinion that they don't fill the seats in Washington. I've been saying for years that the party's been hijacked by extremists. Can good, stable-minded Democrats ever get it back, or is the party just doomed?
My crystal ball is in the shop. I think right now is a very critical point in this country. These elections that are happening at the federal level, and at the state level are really going to determine the direction of this country. That's why it's so important. Everyone always likes to shine a light on the federal candidates, the president, the senators, congresspeople, etc. But, it's just as important at the state level. We've seen in just a matter of 2 years, New Mexico go full tilt progressive. Everything from energy policy to education to now to the COVID crisis. And, our governor, she has very specific initiatives for herself, and she's leveraging and holding hostage this state for her own advancement and the advancement of the Progressive Party and the Democrat organization. We saw little bits of taste of these things going on with the DCCC. And New Mexico, though it's one of the poorest states and worst performing states in so many metrics, is very influential. I mean, people forget that Ben Ray Lujan was chairman of the DCCC and that he's the assistant speaker of the House with Nancy Pelosi.
Do you think that there's a lot of people in your position? I mean, do you think a lot of people are walking away from this nonsense? Do you think that I know you said that your crystal ball is in the shop, but I mean, is the word on the street, am I right? I mean, are there sane, sensible Democrats? You're an indication that they're out there. Are you out there in large numbers, or do you think this is I was reading here just now, the Washington Post said the walkaway hashtag went viral this weekend as something of a delayed reaction in popular video renouncing liberalism, blah, blah, blah. So encouragingly enough, it seems like there's a lot of people who have had enough of this radical communist, Marxist, socialist attempted takeover, which looks to be becoming in large part successful. To that you say what?
So I would agree, and I think, I can only really speak from the purview of what I can see firsthand in New Mexico. New Mexico has been blue for a long time. A lot of our communities are Democrats, and they don't really know why they're Democrats, especially now when they start seeing these progressive policies hit them at home. People will pay attention when the pain comes home, and whether that's pain in the form of red flag gun laws, infringement on Second Amendment, or when we start looking at some of the issues that we've done in this state. Hundreds and hundreds of restaurants now are closing down. Yeah. Hundreds of businesses in New Mexico are closing down. Families are going broke. And when they say vote blue no matter who, I said, well, you're living in a state that's controlled completely by Democrats.
Right.
So how's that working out? How's that going? And I think the more pain that people feel, unfortunately, will start waking them up. And I do agree there is a silent majority that's paying attention, and they're not part of the conversation.
Well, and they're being silenced. They're being. Twitter is no longer even trying to be secretive about the way that they're censoring people. Facebook has fact checkers. There was an interesting deal that I watched. There was a gentleman who did a test with masks. He had an oxygen sensor. Have you seen that video?
I have. Yes, I have.
And that's fact, right? I mean, he was standing right in front of you with a machine. He put the sensor by his mouth and had an oxygen level or a level of CO2 that was safe to work in according to like OSHA regulations, I think is who he was citing. What would be safe for that? And then
I think it was 19% oxygen was the threshold.
Right. And then below that would be considered dangerous, according to OSHA. Those were the word was dangerous, right? Dangerously low oxygen levels. And so then he puts the mask on and he leaves it on not even for a very long time. I mean, this is just under a minute. And he starts breathing, and then he puts the sensor back in the same place at the corner of his mouth, and it was beeping and alerting, and he was in that dangerously low level. The video was fact-checked by Facebook and removed as, I don't know if they called it insensitive or what they called it, but how do they get away with this? Is it just because, they're a private company like Google, they can silence whoever they want or do anything they want to do?
Well, and that's, part of my area expertise. Part of my campaign was addressing some of that with the Internet Bill of Rights. It was a concept about creating a free and open platforms to have these conversations and protect the First Amendment online. They are a private entity. But when you start looking at the power of Facebook. When you have 2 billion plus active monthly users, this is now the town hall for the world. And there needs to be some kind of standard where we allow free speech. I mean, there's other networks that are coming up for the alternative voice to Facebook, or what I would consider the legitimate conversation. One I know of is called Parler. But the problem is you're in an echo chamber. It's great that you can set up a platform for free speech, but if you can't reach that audience, then it has no value.
That's exactly right. I was looking at some tweets from Dan Bongino, whose narrative I can appreciate. Former cop, I'm a law enforcement supporter. I've worked in the criminal justice system in the private sector for many, many years, and lead an apprehension team responsible for the arrest of thousands of very dangerous fugitives running from justice who have hurt people. So I'm attracted to people like Bongino. And when he started talking about Parler, obviously I wanted to check that out. And like you said, it's an echo chamber. So do you think that Facebook and Twitter are essentially turning themselves into the echo chamber for progressives?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we can see that in just, even in my own campaign about things that have been reported or taken down, or, when I was running Democrats for Democracy as a political action committee versus a candidate, I'm a very analytical guy. I study the graphs, and I could see that I wasn't necessarily getting the reach, the cost per impression, if you will, as a candidate versus running it as a sympathetic, I guess, titled entity.
I might
on
be,
their platform.
A conspiracy theorist, or I may just be emotionally attached to this example because of the nature of my business. But the agency that I run that is responsible for these apprehensions I was talking about, we have a very large social media following on Facebook in particular. And when I say very large, I'm not talking numbers like Gwen Stefani by any means or Travis Barker, but I'm talking, 35 to 40,000 people that follow our page. When we're looking for somebody that we're having a hard time finding and we're seeking the assistance of the public in locating this person, especially somebody who's done something heinous and or is very physically easily identifiable, facial tattoos, etc., we'll throw them up on Facebook and even boost the ad to try to get a response from the public to help us more swiftly bring this person to justice. I have noticed that in the last 5 years, it takes much longer for that ad to get approved, number one. Number two, 50% of the time it does not get approved. And number three, when it does, the impressions are a quarter of what they used to be. Is it because criminals are bad? Or is it because criminals are good? Why is this? I mean, I can speculate it's that because criminals, who, by the way, are being released in large numbers just in time to go to the ballot box in November, citing COVID as a safety concern. So are criminals the biggest supporter of the Democratic Party now?
Well, I just think, and this is not the first time I've heard it from a media outlet that they're being punished online. I've heard it in search algorithms on YouTube. To be honest, it's your message doesn't align with the Eastern Bloc media and propaganda.
Yeah. And you're speaking from a very educated standpoint. I mean, this is what you're an expert in. This is what you deal with every single day. Brett Kokinadis with us. He was a former candidate for the GOP 1st Congressional District in New Mexico, only after walking away from Democrats. He had an epiphany. You were raised Democrat, were you not?
That's right. Yeah, I was born and raised in a Democrat household. My dad was a tradesman in the union. So Democrat policies and positions were very much part of everyday life. And
you had these conversations at the dinner table, no doubt. You've alluded to several times during this conversation and previously during our private conversations leading up to this, you've alluded to a communist takeover. You've said that you feel like Democrats have been replaced by extremist socialists, and to that I agree. Do you have some sort of proof of this? I mean, do you have some evidence of that? Have you seen anything or heard anything? Do you have any inside information that listeners of this show the American small business owner or middle-class truck driver can bring home to their families and say, look at what these people are doing. Don't be so stubborn. Open your eyes. Wake up.
Well, just look at what's happening every day. I don't have any concrete evidence. I don't know if anyone would, but look what's happening every day in this country, in our states. And everything that you would have thought was a conspiracy theory a couple years ago is now on the table for consideration. When we look at what's happened with COVID, the fact that we spent $3 trillion to make people whole in 12 weeks and wanted another $3.7 trillion by the Democrat Party, to continue that. New Mexico has been locked down, keeping our businesses closed, our restaurants in limited capacity, and we're one of the best performing states with COVID numbers. We've had patients, or I should say alleged patients that were waiting in line to get tested, never got tested, but yet received notification that they were positive for COVID. We have the expansion of the SNAP program. And
excuse me, can you repeat that? Did you just say that you have people in New Mexico who were not tested but received positive test results for coronavirus?
That's correct.
How does that happen?
That I couldn't answer to you. I don't know. That's something that we need to look into.
I mean, that's
something that's not only happening in our state, but there's been reports of similar activities in Florida. The narrative is COVID is like the plague. It's going to kill you if you get it. And that's just simply not true.
It's not true.
I mean, I've had friends that have had COVID, and they said they lost a little bit of their sense of smell and taste and fully recovered without any complications. And I'm not saying that there aren't people who don't get sick, or die from it, but it's just not the mass panic emergency. I mean, you look at Europe and you look at other places where they don't have mask policies, and they're doing better than we are.
If the word coronavirus was never mentioned, would you speculate that we may not have even noticed the difference in this year's flu season?
Yes,
yeah.
I would agree with that statement.
I
think when we look at what's happening, I mean, we'll go back a year or two and we start looking at, the impeachment attempts against the president, Russian interference, Ukraine interference, all this stuff. And it's like, oh, that didn't work. Okay, we need something else. And now we have this, pandemic coming out of China that we're just going to, exponentially progress through media to keep people in fear and panic, destroy our economy. What's coming next? Well, now we have to make people whole. We need to make sure that they don't go hungry. And I'm not against that. I don't want people to go homeless. I don't want people to go hungry. I want to protect our at-risk patients. But I don't think that we need to shut down our economy to do that. And I don't think we need to be spending trillions and trillions of dollars to do that.
Okay. So fair enough. And I agree with you. What is the plan? I remember when I was younger, we didn't have a vaccination for the chickenpox. Do you remember chickenpox parties? Are you old enough to remember that?
I was a participant in chickenpox parties. Yes, I was.
What do you think about a big COVID party? Can we do something like that?
Well, I think it's kind of happening on its own. I mean, we saw the mass gathering of Harley bikers this week. We've seen, kids going out on the beach. We've seen protests. Peaceful and not peaceful protests. We've seen acts of terrorism and gatherings. There's plenty of opportunities for mass outbreaks of COVID to be occurring, and it's not happening.
Do you think that, because when I first saw this, there was actually a group of young adults in, I believe it was Kentucky. They were spitting on each other, sharing each other's drinks, licking each other's tongues, doing everything that they could to try to contract the coronavirus. And this was earlier on. I called BS on this deal almost immediately. And I did it on Facebook. And I was told by people that I know, by people that I'm friends with, that I was a conspiracy theorist and that I was a nut job. Come on, man. You're not insinuating that there is some made-up manufactured virus. Well, listen, we can agree that the virus is real. I mean, a coronavirus has been going around for hundreds of years. The common cold is a coronavirus. The COVID-19 is a strain of the coronavirus that, there's physical proof that this thing has been modified. So as time goes on, I'm less and less of a conspiracy theorist and more of a self-backpatter, if you will, for my immediate speculation or skepticism, I should say. But who isn't skeptical of our government? Don't they give us enough reasons to be skeptical and to be afraid of their tyrannical takeover?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and think about going back in history. We've had, SARS and MERS and the swine flu and all these other things.
Why weren't those big deals?
We've never been in a position where we've quarantined the healthy. You quarantine sick people.
Exactly. And when you restrict the movements of sick people, you call it a quarantine. When you restrict the movement of healthy people, you call that tyranny. The governor of Minnesota is on board with what sounds like synonymous policies with the governor of the People's Republic of New Mexico. What's going to stop her, and what's going to stop state leaders from continuing the stripping of individual liberties and the unconstitutional takeover of your freedom?
Well, New Mexico is in a very unique situation, and those two governors are in constant competition with each other. And I kind of post some satire about that, about the governor instituting fines in Michigan and our governor seeing her and raising her on those penalties. We've had an issue that was challenged in the New Mexico Supreme Court by the Restaurant Association, because in our state we have two pieces of legislation. One is enacted, which is the emergency powers granted to the governor to handle a crisis, and the other one is FARA. And both of those pieces of legislation do allow for some type of civil penalty. However, one is considered civil and another is considered criminal, though a misdemeanor. The governor has the ability to fine people $100 or up to $5,000 per day for violating her orders, and that's been upheld by our state Supreme Court. We're a Democratic-controlled state. Both chambers are controlled by the Democrats. There's very little checks and balances. And finally, the only thing that I think will work in this state is by calling an extraordinary session, which means that our legislature can call a session without the approval of the governor. Our Constitution in this state does not allow for recall, and the only method to remove the governor would be through impeachment, which originates in the House, which is controlled by the Democrats, which is not going to happen.
What about arresting her?
We've talked about the sheriff, but as of right now, the problem is that the Supreme Court has ruled, at least at the state level, that everything that the governor is doing has been constitutional and within her authority.
Obviously, it's not. Right. And there's language in the Constitution that specifically contradicts the ruling of your state Supreme Court.
Keep in mind, we have three Democrat chief justices and one one kind of moderate left-leaning Republican.
This is right out in the wide open corruption at its highest levels of state government. Without even trying to hide it, the Supreme Court is ruling in favor of what I am calling a tyrannical governor in New Mexico. I'm going to see Michigan, and I'm going to raise the penalties. Minnesota, where I am, following in the same footsteps. With all of this going on, how long is it going to be before leave me alone Joe, I don't want to be involved guy, says, that's it, I've had enough? And when do we start seeing people just go absolutely off the cliff?
Well, again, I think going back to our previous, dialogue was when things start hurting people at home. And, that's why when we started having the conversation about the HEALS Act at the federal level, I was very supportive of Mitch McConnell and the Senate standing their ground firmly about not, extending the support as it was in the CARES Act. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that people need to feel that pressure to wake up. There's plenty of us that see it coming. There's plenty of us that pay attention on a day-to-day basis. But your average citizen that, wakes up every morning, goes to work, takes care of the kids, they may not be directly tuned in because they're being taken care of, and in some cases doing better now than they were before.
I'm really enjoying our conversation. I got to ask you, the president is more than likely I'm predicting a large victory. And I'm not saying that because I'm overly confident in the American people. I'm saying that because I'm overly confident, or at least somewhat confident, in his ability to campaign. He's a very calculated individual, and he does have a lot of grassroots support. What do you think is... look at... George Floyd died of an overdose on the streets while he was in police custody. The mainstream media framed it as a racially motivated murder, and now we have leaked body cam footage that shows that Floyd was admitting that he was going to die before he was ever even touched by a police officer. He was screaming about how he couldn't breathe while he was standing upright before ever being physically encountered by a police officer. The family of George Floyd has repeatedly asked that that people stop this burning, stop this looting, stop this rioting. George would have wanted none of this in his name. And regardless of his criminal history, we have to respect the wishes of the family of a dead man. At least you would think that we would hold on to those morals and values here in our country. You saw what happened in Chicago over the weekend. Lori Lightfoot has completely lost control of that city. Jacob Fry is mirroring everything that she's doing here in Minneapolis. It's almost like this is what they want. This is what they're hoping for. Violence, chaos, destruction, distraction. So if the nation is reacting like this in the wake of the death of a career criminal thug while in police custody in that city, in Minneapolis, what is going to happen on November 4th when Donald Trump secures the presidency for 4 more years?
Well, I agree with you, and I hope that the president is successful, and I'm not saying that he won't be at his own doing. But looking at what's happening, we look at Portland, we look at Antifa, we look at what happened earlier with Seattle, we look at all of these riots. The question that I have, they're pushing for the mail-in ballots. In our state, we had it in the legislature in the special session that was called to address solely our budget crisis issue, but they introduced the mail-in ballots. It did not pass. They came back, and I'm assuming some people got a talking to, and they decided to have a vote for reconsideration, and it ended up passing.
So if they can't beat him, they're going to cheat him.
And what's going to happen, I think, and this, of course, is just my opinion and speculation, but as we see escalations of violence, will there be violence from Antifa peaceful protesters, as Congresswoman from New Mexico, Deb Haaland, says? Mm-hmm. Will there be violence brought to the polling places? Yeah. To discourage people to participate in the election.
The president was he was scrutinized for saying or suggesting that maybe it was unsafe. I don't know that he was actually really considering it. He had tweeted something about postponing the elections. They jumped all over him when in fact it wasn't really his intention of postponing the elections if you take him at verbatim. However, you said something interesting to me on the phone about a week ago when you said you don't think it's going to be the president that would postpone an election, but who?
I think it'll be Congress. Mm-hmm. I think if we have another resurgency of COVID, whether that is being able to be substantiated or not, mm-hmm. Congress may decide to postpone the election, in which case they could perhaps put in a president pro tem. These are just theories, of course, not what I'm saying is actually going to happen. But when we start looking at how things kind of unfolded in our state, for example, our primary election, they wanted to do the primary election through mail-in ballot, and the Supreme Court said no, they couldn't do it.
Do you put it past liberal progressives to do this? We've seen everything.
I don't put past. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's 2020. Everything is plausible at this point.
2020 can go to hell.
Regardless of the outcome of the election, I think that you are going to have unrest of some sort, whether it's local and isolated or whether it's something more substantial. The country already feels like it's in a civil war. I reach out on social media, and I try to have conversations with the progressives within their den. And I want to have a legitimate, honest conversation about policy. And it's just there is no ability to communicate.
Brett Coconautis, technology entrepreneur, over 20 years in communications, mobile software, computer vision technologies, and a walkaway Democrat. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed having you on the show. Do you think you could come back and you stomach this sometime in the future, and maybe when Richard is back, you'll actually enjoy talking to somebody like him?
I think it would be a great time. I've had an excellent conversation with you, and I appreciate it.
I can't thank you enough for your time. Good luck down there in New Mexico. My God. It sounds like just an absolute shit show in Mexico. Synonymous with the rest of the country in 2020. For Brett Coconautis, my name is Stu Peters, and for Richard Leonard, thanks for being here. See you next time.
Broadcasting live on the OpsLens app, iHeartRadio, Mojo 50 Radio, and online worldwide at thepcradioshow.com.